Richard, then Michael.
Can we come back to the real world and talk about the cycling a little more? I recognise that we will not be able to have a licensing process or a compulsory insurance process for cyclists. But can't we do more with cycle for proficiency within schools, working with the Met government and ourselves, and make them aware of the rules, the regulations and the process and acting safe? It's all very well offering something to somebody, but at what point are we really pushing to get it taken up? I bet you the majority of schools in London don't do cycle proficiency.
I mean, that's a fair point. We do see the museum on our behalf. I put in a previous report. Do see all year 10 pupils. Can't ever remember which years are which anymore. Year 7 pupils. Year 7 pupils, and we will go away, Richard, and check that cycling is dealt with as part of that. That was primarily originally a sort of how do you use transport in London, how do you behave on public transport, but we can deal with a bit of it in there. And you are absolutely right that every we should work as hard as we can to get the rules of these rules over at an early stage.
Yeah, and the environment in which we're presenting to cyclists, is that the best design that it is? I mean, we have discussed it in panels, but I am aware that many of our roads are utterly and totally over-engineered, and that some of them look like a Damien Hirst painting with reds, yellows and God knows what all over them. But are our cycle highways truly conveying to cyclists, you are entering a dangerous area, or is it just a nice blue carpet which takes them into the roundabouts which are dangerous? As I leave motorways, there is hatched areas which encourage you to slow down and certainly be aware. Are we doing the same on the cycle highways, or are we just conveying this is your bit of road, carry on regardless? And can we build in greater safety features? There's
a link between those 2 points which just might be worth making. On the school children's training, one of the things that the research has shown is that the reason that kids then who are trained don't necessarily start cycling is because of the roads themselves, and there's concerns about, okay, I understand when I'm in a playground or a car park, but then when it's actually translated onto the road network. So we've been trying to shift the schools program away from just training children into actually looking at the routes to school as well as training children. Yeah. And that's one of the ways to get not necessarily more uptake, but get uptake that actually translates into children cycling safely and regularly, rather than simply being a training exercise which then comes to an end. But I'll let Peter or Leon comment on that.
But the safe routes to schools are marked on paper. They're not marked on anywhere else.
Quite, which is why I think in many cases we need to look at the area around the school and say, are there genuinely routes to school that a child would actually feel safe, and more to the point, the parent would feel safe allowing their children to cycle to school on that route. But Peter might want to comment on the superhighway point.
So, I mean, I think there are many views about what you should mark on a carriageway and what it means. I'm sure that if the mayor were here, he would say that his original intention with cycle superhighways was to, in a combination of measures, including encouraging employers and people who live near them to cycle, to point out routes to cycle to work. The blue paint no more than a red bus lane doesn't give you authority to cross traffic signals at red, and if a bus driver told you that they cycled, that he drove across the junction because a bus lane was painted on the road, no magistrate would have any hesitation but to prosecute him and take away his vocational licence, and that would be right. The blue paint doesn't give anybody authority to breach any of the other traffic regulations, but it does try and point out a space, and what the original intention was to increase the number of cyclists, which itself makes cycling safer. The pressure now is for segregation. The numbers of cyclists can justify that. The picture that Daniel referred to is an artist's impression of a route that can be segregated north-south because the road space will allow it. Similarly, east-west on the embankment. Obviously, if you can segregate cyclists, then you can do it rather differently.
Commissioner, you're missing my point entirely. my point was, can the cycle lanes convey to cyclists that this area is dangerous rather than present a continuous blue stripe? And I know from stuff which I've done where I live, where I've managed to get TfL and the local council not to divide the main high street with a white line. Accidents have actually dropped and disappeared. Can we convey to people you are entering a dangerous area by cross-hatching or whatever, making it clear, doing our utmost?
Well, I mean, actually, Richard, I'm a bit lost to answer that, because I don't think that space on the road is any more or less dangerous than the rest of the space on the road. It's an encouragement to cycle, and it's an encouragement to get sufficient numbers. You could argue that we should have less road markings, I suppose, but I may be being...
I'll take the point up outside the meeting, Madam Chair, because we seem to be...
I mean, it might be worth, it might be worth saying that the Mayor has committed to reviewing all the existing cycle superhighways and seeing whether they need to be redesigned or whether the design needs to be lifted so that they're actually delivering what people now expect. I mean, expectations on this matter are changing, practically by the month. So that is part of the cycling vision that was announced earlier in the year. And so that is happening now within TfL. Michael?
Can I weigh in on cycling as one of, I don't know how many board members who actually does occasionally cycle. First of all, we're in no doubt when we cycle that we're in a dangerous area all the time. And so simply adding more markings to say this is a particularly dangerous spot might not help. I think what I would be looking for is, there is this huge infrastructure play, the thick end of £1 billion that's being spent on cycling. And I think what we need to do is to match that with some of the softer, whether it's training or whether it's also, I don't know what to call it, but cultural piece, where I'm just very struck when I go around to other cities that there isn't the almost open warfare between between different groups of road users. I've cycled and I've been hooted at. Leon's wandered off to get a coffee. I've been hooted at by a bus driver for doing perfectly legal things, like positioning myself on the right-hand side of a lane to turn right, which I don't see how I can turn right legally and wait at a red light if I'm not allowed to do that. And in fact, in the highway code, that is what I'm supposed to do. So you get hooted at by other road users, not always buses. And there is this sort of tension that is pervasive and extremely dangerous. I think training in schools is clearly a big part of it, but I don't know whether we've looked at the statistics of the cycling injuries, KSIs, fatalities, because I suspect that quite a lot of them did not go through the British school system, just by looking at the names and hearing some of the terrible stories. So I think that there's something that we really need to think of, quite an all-encompassing way of lowering the temperature and also training. And just finally, I'm just very nervous about this business of, I think that the Mayor's been very good about not targeting a particular set of road users and saying it's always, well, he's occasionally strayed, but he hasn't blamed the cyclists for their own problems. But we have to see this in the context of these are vulnerable road users, as are pedestrians. So it is not an equal, in a sense, it's not an equal battle for road space when a cyclist who makes a mistake endangers generally only him or herself, and a car driver endangers others. And certainly when I learnt to drive, I was told not just to compensate, not just to try not to make any mistakes, but to drive defensively and anticipate that others might make mistakes. So I think there's a whole education cultural piece somehow that just, we need to match the spending on the hardware with the spending on the software, or at least some really deep thought on that, because it feels quite bitty to me still.
Well, the 913 million over the life of the plan is an all-inclusive sum that includes a lot of that money, and clearly you're absolutely right that this is not just about physical infrastructure. It's about many, many things, and the reason why I bore on about the construction HGVs is because actually, I do take your point absolutely. I think every road user has a responsibility for themselves and others. And if you drive a big and not dirty, but a big and heavy vehicle, you do have the responsibility. You know, we're literally working on every front, and I think I mean I would agree with you. I think it's very regrettable that there's so much antagonism in this. If there were time, we would tell you about the efforts that we're making with the EU. I was in Brussels last week. We need to go to the UN. The design of heavy vehicles on London's road is not satisfactory. We need to do something about that. There's endless activity on that, and you're quite right. We've got campaigns running about people looking after themselves and each other. Vernon's people have re-energised themselves to do that sort of thing, and you know, actually, that is all part of the activity in the 913 million. Some of this is about presentation. There are people around who will present this wholly as a physical road design issue. There are others who, I think, more reasonably look at it as a behavioural issue that we need to approach in many, many ways.
Can I just ask one supplementary to that, which is, in the light of the recent accidents and recently more obvious trends in KSIs, have we looked at any of that programme and asked whether we can fast track it to improve quickly in certain areas?
Yes,
across the programme.
I mean,
not just one roundabout.
Leon and his people have been, you know, one of. Well, I don't think you could spend any more time and effort on one or two of these places than we have done. You know, Bow Roundabout is a subject of huge concern. We've made several changes there. We've got people actively looking at some of these sites. There's huge pressure from the Mayor, from Isabel, from the Cycling Commissioner on Leon and his people. It is a resource issue. As Andrew Gilligan himself pointed out, you can make decisions in haste that you will regret. You know, road design is not a simple thing, and the other thing that we're trying to do, because we have to, is to balance what we do on the highways for all other road users as well.
I just said, I mean, there are literally hundreds of locations on the network at the moment that are being redesigned within Leon's shop. I think there's clearly a kind of communications issue. Well, first of all, those are going to start to be delivered on the road network next year and the year after. So there's just a timing issue. But there's also a communications issue of trying to get across the volume of activity that's happening within the organization. I was just saying to Peter, it does seem to me that getting a kind of much more detailed presentation on exactly what we're doing and where we are up to at this point in time, not in some published document 6 months ago, and some people will be more up to speed with it, maybe through surface panel discussions, etc. So we'll just need to think about the best way to get a discussion, I think, with the whole board, which goes through the behavioral side as well as the physical infrastructure side. I mean, you know, we've talked about 33 junctions that are being redone. We've got some very major schemes at King's Cross, Vauxhall, Elephant and Castle, you name it. We've got the east-west, north-south cycle superhighways. I mean, all of this stuff is very actively in development, but there's a gap, I think, between here and you guys in terms of just bringing up to speed with what we are.
I think also members of the Finance and Policy Committee early in the new year will see some details of the engineering side and also the education side.
Yeah, it's just getting that to the whole board, I think, is quite important.
I would agree with that. I think this has become such a high-profile issue that it needs to be coming back to the board.
The other thing I just would say is that the people who do this, I mean, you know, there isn't an unlimited supply of highway and traffic engineers, and we've got some of the best ones, not just in the country but in the world. And the same people who are doing this are also the people who are responsible for the pedestrian KSIs, which also need to be taken into account, and which actually there are more of. And we need to, you know, the road safety plan, which the board saw a few months ago, we're intending to carry out in its entirety. And there is some danger that actually all this resource swings about by location. One or two of the locations that you will have read about, and which no doubt Leon spoke about, the Safety and Sustainability Panel, although they're marked as being on or near Cycle Superhighway 2, actually the the fatalities have had nothing to do with the cycle superhighway. If you cycle across the front of a bus when it's driving through green traffic lights, you might expect to get hit by it. And one sad fatality is exactly that case.
All right. Brian and then Roger.